Vern Yip is a renowned designer who made his TV debut on TLC's Trading Spaces. He can now be seen on HGTV's Deserving Design and Design Star.
I was born in Hong Kong. My parents actually fled China during the Communist Revolution with my sister, she's 10 years older than I am. And they moved to Hong Kong, and I was born there. And at the age of 2 months, my parents decided, we wanted to give our kids the best education possible. My parents moved to the Washington, D.C. area when they first came over from Hong Kong, and they lived in Northern Virginia, and I grew up in Northern Virginia. They initially lived in Arlington, Virginia, and then we moved to Falls Church, and then we moved to McLean, and McLean is really where I kind of consider home. It's sort of my hometown growing up.
Growing up in the D.C. area exposed Vern to the arts at a young age.
And one of my favorite things to do, just whenever we had any free time growing up, was to go to the Smithsonian and go to the West Wing of the National Gallery of Art, designed by I.M. Pei. And as a kid, just like kind of entering that space, I immediately knew that this was something that I would love to do. I loved the built environment, the impact of being in a great space. That's sort of what kind of set it all up for me, going into architecture and going into design. It's so hard because my parents came over, they sacrificed everything, and they really wanted me to have a solid job. And in Asian culture, especially Chinese culture, solid job equals being a doctor. And that's what they really wanted for me. They wanted me to be a doctor because they also thought I had the disposition for it. My mom used to always say, she said, I could give you a group of the cutest puppies and you would always pick the sickest one. That's the one that you want to take home. And so I actually went to the University of Virginia as a pre-med student. I got my Bachelor's of Arts in Economics and my Bachelor of Science in Chemistry, and took the MCATs, the Medical College Admissions Test, got into med school, and 2 weeks before med school was about to start, I remember walking into my mom's bedroom very early in the morning and just sort of saying to her, I can't do this. This is not what I want to do, because from a very young age, I loved buildings, I loved houses. My favorite toys were always Legos, and I never built airplanes or cars. I always built houses and office buildings, and I was always just intrigued by proportion and by scale, and that's what interested me. And so from a very, very young age, I think that she knew. I know that she knew. She would do things like, we had an addition done to our house, and I think I was like maybe 10 or 11 when I decided that I could design the addition. And she said, okay, we're gonna build this. So she had me do elevations, she had me do a plan, she got it approved by the county, and she built the addition that I designed.
Though she supported him in his decision,
but she just was afraid. She was afraid that if I went and did it professionally, I wouldn't be able to support myself, because the truth of the matter is, I'm like one of the lucky ones. I'm one of the lucky ones that actually makes a decent living and can feed myself and put a roof over my head doing this creative profession. She was so supportive, and her immediate response was, okay, that's fine. I trust you. If this is what you want to do with your life, if what you want to do with your life is go to architecture school, which is what I told her I wanted to do, and what I ended up doing, she said, just apply yourself. Make sure that whatever you do it to the fullest of your ability, and that you love it, and that it's important to you. And
so Vern followed his heart.
So instead of going to med school, I took that time and worked and then applied for graduate school. And as soon as my mom knew that I wanted to go pursue my master's in architecture, she put me on a train. We went up to New York. We walked into the offices of I. M. Pei, this person that I've been just, you know, so completely admiring my entire childhood because I just loved the West Wing of the National Gallery of Art. She marched me into his office and she said, "Where should my son go to school?" And he said, "Well, you know, some of my best students are coming from Georgia Tech. You know, try and get your MBA while you're at it." And so I did.
And so began a long, ambitious journey.
I moved to Atlanta after getting into Georgia Tech, and I was one of the first kids that went into this experimental program to pursue my master's in business and my master's in architecture simultaneously.
His parents fully supported his efforts.
No matter what, my mom always had this underlying thing of, you're not going to have to pay for tuition. No matter what, I've got your tuition covered. I want you to go to school and not worry about it, not have that additional stress of having to you know, hold down a full-time job to make sure that you can go to school and feed yourself while you're in school and all that. I want you to just focus on academics. In many ways, I felt like I had let my mom down. I didn't give her a doctor like she wanted. She never made me feel that way, and I want to be really clear about that. She always told me how proud she was of me, but I had that feeling that I had let her down, and so I was out to prove myself, and I got a job with the largest architecture interior design firm here in Atlanta, really in the Southeast, Thompson, Benchlet, and Steinbach. And I got a job as an architecture intern, making $24,000 a year with, you know, 2 undergraduate degrees, 2 graduate degrees. I was making $24,000 a year and working my tail off.
But this didn't faze Vern.
I mean, there were moments, even in an 80-hour work week, where I was sitting at my desk and thinking to myself, I'm so lucky. I'm so lucky that I get to finally, like, make a living doing what I love.
This hard work did not go unnoticed.
But I remember the head of the interior design division of TVS came to my desk one day and she said, "There is something about you that makes me think that you're going to be a great interior designer." And I really don't know what that was. But she said that, and she said, "I'm going to give you an opportunity." And it was a huge, huge lucky break. She gave me the corporate headquarters of Disney Cruise to design just as Disney was launching its cruise division. And it was my introduction into the interior design world. And I remember thinking to myself the entire time, don't drop this ball, don't drop this ball, you cannot drop this ball. And thankfully I didn't drop the ball, and additional interior design opportunities came after that. And so
an interior designer was born.
that I worked at private firms for about 5 years, and then in 1999 I thought to myself, I've got to start my own business. You know, I'm ready to go out on my own.
And his efforts paid off.
In the year 2000, I ended up winning Southeast Designer of the Year, which was a huge, huge, huge break for me. It got my face in some magazines and some publications, and one of those magazines landed on the desk of the production company that was putting together the first season of a show on TLC called Trading Spaces.
Television.
I never for 1 second growing up ever thought about a career in television. And it's funny because I get approached a lot by people who say to me, "Oh gosh, you know, I want to be in television. Can you give me some words of advice?" And I always have to say to them, you know, I completely stumbled into it. It wasn't something that I ever worked for. It wasn't something that I desired to do.
And it actually presented a challenge.
But after having just won this award, I thought, this is going to be horrible for my career, because the concept of that show is $1,000 and 2 days to transform an entire room. And I had built my career up to the point where I was working with private clients who would spend $1,000 on a lampshade, or, you know, on a vase or something, You know, I was like, this is going to be a horrible move for my career.
But it wasn't.
I liked what it said about design. I liked the fact that $4,000 you could transform a room, you could show somebody how to do that, and that it would make design accessible to a much wider audience, because design actually has the ability to transform your life. It's not about making a room pretty, it's not about selecting the right color or picking the prettiest fabric or whatever. It's about transforming a room or house or space to transform somebody's life. And when you do that, you give them the ability to have a much higher quality life by having higher quality experiences in those spaces. Better quality time with their friends, better quality time with their family, and helping them express who they are in their space. That's what I love about design, and I really saw trading spaces as a way to do that.
And it presented an exciting challenge.
One of my favorite things to do is to have somebody say to me, "You can't do that." And I love to be able to say, "Oh yeah, watch me. I can. I can make a room look phenomenal for $1,000 in 2 days." I loved having that put in front of me as a challenge.
Before he knew it, Vern was traveling the country and meeting new friends.
That show took off in a way that nobody anticipated. And now I can look back on it and I could have some appreciation for it. But really, when you're in the middle of it, you just don't even really know what's happening, because one minute I'm working on a television show, the next minute, like, we went from being a daytime show the first season to sort of hitting the cultural zeitgeist and being moved to primetime, to then being nominated for Emmys, and we were at the Emmys, and then the next thing I know, I'm, talking to Katie Couric on the Today Show, and then I'm on Oprah, and then I'm on Regis and Kelly, and it just kind of like went from like 0 to 1,000 so quickly. At one point, I remember going to Times Square and seeing my face on a huge billboard in Times Square, and I just thought to myself at that moment, oh my gosh, this show is huge. This is so much bigger than I realize.
It even landed him on the Oprah Winfrey Show.
Meeting Oprah for the first time is I think probably scary for anybody, but it was really scary for me. I mean, I did not want to mess up, and I completely admire her and respect her and everything that she's done, and I just really wanted to make sure that I did a good job.
But Vern's next venture did not enjoy the same success as Trading Spaces.
This industry can be an industry where one minute you are really celebrated, and the next minute nobody knows your name.
Find out more when we return on Journeys.
After Trading Spaces, I left Trading Spaces after being with the show for 4 years. And I left just because at that point I had done close to 70 rooms, and I felt like I had proved the point that you could do a great room for $1,000. And I was anxious to kind of stretch my creative wings. I really wanted to do something different. And I had an opportunity to shoot a pilot for NBC.
But this time around, things proved to be a little more challenging.
Because the pilot ended up airing as a 1-hour special. After we shot it, it just kind of hung around for a while. And then they finally aired it as a 1-hour special, and it didn't do well. It was a really hard part of my life. It was devastating and disappointing, and it was hard. And there were a myriad of reasons why it didn't do well, but I took it really personally. I think it's kind of hard not to, but I took it really personally. And this industry can be an industry where one minute you are really celebrated, and the next minute nobody knows your name. One of the things that I always end up doing is I always end up blaming myself when things go bad. And I always try to think to myself, what could I have done differently? What should I have done? And turn it into a learning experience, which I have.
After the NBC experience taught him some valuable lessons, Vern rather quickly began discussions with HGTV, a network as a whole more closely aligned with his ambitions.
My entire career, I have always looked at that network and thought, this is where I belong. You know, it's home and garden television, and for me, it actually feels like being home. Pretty quickly, I ended up starting on a new series called Design Star, and I was cast as one of the judges, and I'm still one of the judges, and we're about to shoot our 4th season of that show. It's a competition show, and it's a show where somebody actually who's undiscovered has the opportunity to get their own TV show. And I think that concept is great.
After filming season 1 of Design Star, Vern was offered his own show.
Deserving Design is a show that I wanted to do from the beginning because that show is about celebrating ordinary citizens who are doing extraordinary things to make the world a better place. It's an inspirational show.
And his appearance on Oprah was what inspired Deserving Design.
They brought me on board to help out a waitress named Linda, who, on the salary of a waitress, was able to send 6 kids to college, and all 6 of her kids became doctors or lawyers, and she paid for it all. And I always thought to myself, that's incredible. She is just an ordinary person like me, like you, like the guy sitting next to you in traffic, like the person you're passing by in the grocery store. But her personal story is so inspirational and so extraordinary. That needs to be celebrated. If I could do Deserving Design for the rest of my life, I would. My mom never lived to see the end product of Deserving Design, but she always knew that it was important to me to get a show like that made. And so I'm really, really happy that it finally happened.
And each room transformation only solidified Vern's passion for helping others.
I am not kidding you. That show has restored my faith in humanity, and I think it will, if you are given the opportunity to work on Deserving Design, your faith in humanity will be restored as well, because it really teaches you that people left to their own devices will do the right thing.
With so many rewards built into the show, how does Vern know when he's hit a home run?
You know, the biggest compliment that somebody can pay you as a designer, in my opinion, is to be able to say, you know, I feel like you crawled inside my head and gave me what I really, really wanted. You know, I don't want to make it like a version of something that I would want in my personal home. It's not about that. It's about giving them something that they really want.
Vern believes a home should say something about who you are.
Because I always believe like you should have things that are meaningful to you. And of course, one of my passions is traveling. So wherever I go, I always end up hauling back like found treasures. This is actually a piece of furniture I designed. I had the lines based off of an old antique Chinese cabinet and just sort of kind of modernized it and had it made. But you know, this is a piece from Thailand. These are teapots. These are old antique teapots from the country of Bhutan. This piece I love. This is from Jaipur, India, and it's actually carved out of sandalwood. This is all hand done, and it tells a story. I mean, just the craftsmanship there. I love this part too. This thing comes down and there's a little elephant doing battle with the horse.
And travel has heavily influenced the way Vern designs.
It gives you perspective as a designer that, you know, the world is a really great place, and you know, we do things in a very typical way here every day. But just because that's the way that we do things doesn't necessarily mean it's the only way to do things. And as a designer, that's the challenge, is you're always trying to find like the best solutions and, you know, sort of unique items. Throughout the house, I mean, you can obviously see I have no rules. You know, contemporary doesn't have to go with contemporary here. I've got everything mixed. It's important to have stuff in your house that you love. You know, I mean, a lot of people feel like when they move into some place, they have to immediately furnish it and accessorize it and have it completely done. But what ends up happening is you end up filling it with things that don't have any meaning to you. And if you have things that you've kind of acquired through time, through travel, through gifts, through whatever, those things have meaning, and you will keep those things for a lifetime. If you just sort of acquire things to have things, then you're eventually just going to have things, and they're not going to have any meaning to you, and you're going to throw them out, and it's just going to be bad for the environment. You're going to waste your money. When you walk into somebody's house, it should reveal something about them. It should tell you something about what's important to them. Any object in this room is a story that I can tell. It's not just that I went down to a store and bought it. I hauled it back from a trip where I bought it because it spoke to me for a particular reason. You know, if everybody's house looks like page 27 out of a catalog, when you go to their house, you don't experience who they are, you just experience page 27 out of that catalog. Being an Asian American 100% influences my design. You know, in a lot of Asian design, there is a real emphasis of clean lines, you know, and I bring that to the table in whatever I'm doing, whether I'm doing, you know, Tuscan or French country or the super contemporary or super traditional. You know, I always try to edit it and have a less is more approach. And it's sometimes really hard to do, you know, because you will get people who say, well, really, I don't agree with less is more. I think more is more. And that requires me to kind of step outside of my box and to say, okay, well, if more is more for you, then more it is. But I really do think, you know, being Chinese American has really, really influenced the way that I design. Even if a room doesn't look like it's Asian, I think just by kind of getting it pared down and edited to a certain level kind of showcases that Asian influence.
So what does the future hold for Vern?
I love what I do. I really do. I love getting up every morning and being able to change people's lives through design. I would love to have a family someday. I'm really looking forward to being a dad someday. You know, I wish my mom had been able to see all of that. You know, she made me the man I am today, you know, and I really wish that she could have seen all of this. She was my best friend. She was my hero. She was absolutely the most influential and most important person in my life. And when she passed away, my sister and I decided to pay tribute to her by setting up a memorial scholarship in her name at the Ullman Cancer Fund. And the Ullman Cancer Fund is a nonprofit that seeks to help young adults who are either afflicted with cancer, have survived cancer, or who have a family member like a mother or father who has had cancer and their lives are subsequently impacted. So the Ullman Cancer Fund is a great resource for young adults in that situation, and we set up a memorial scholarship in my mom's name at Ullman, and I'm looking to continue to work with Ullman Cancer Fund to kind of not only bring attention to my mom's scholarship and to continue to offer somebody the chance to further their education, because that's what my mom would have wanted, but just to kind of bring attention to that cause.
His advice to others?
It's more important to be a good person than it is to be famous. It's more important to be an educated person than it is to be famous. You know, it's more important to be good to your family than it is to be famous. There's so many other things in this world that are more important. You have to be a good person. You know, that's your number one duty in life. Be a good person. That's what my family always taught me. What my mom would always taught me was be a good person and make sure that you always continue to educate yourself. And if you can help somebody, you should. Those are always the things that she would say. It's important in life that you give yourself the chance to pursue something that you're passionate about and that you set yourself up for success that way, because when you're passionate about something, you're going to be great at it. You're just going to excel at it. And that's your way that you can help the world. By sharing your talents on that level, you know, you can make the world a better place doing anything as long as you're passionate about it and you have the right mindset that you're there for the right reason. Some of those values that I really hope to someday pass on to my kids is a real emphasis on family, and also a real emphasis on education. Then the other thing is really work ethic. You know, I think it's really important to apply yourself and to work hard. And
so what's the key to success?
I think the key to success is always education. Make sure that you are as educated of an individual as you can possibly be. Work hard. We're afforded so many things in this country that people all over the world, and I've seen it firsthand, are not afforded. You know, if you want to make something of yourself here, you can do it. The only person stopping you is you.
Joya Das is no stranger to TV. From anchoring in Casper, Wyoming to delivering financial reports from Wall Street, Joya's is a story of hard work and determination.
Well, my parents emigrated from West Bengal. My mom is from Calcutta and my dad is from Myanmar, which is formerly Burma. And my parents had an arranged marriage, so my dad was actually already living here, and at that time, I guess a lot of word of mouth carried a lot of weight. And there was word out that, you know, there was the eligible daughter of a doctor in Calcutta who was, you know, of marrying age, and so they got married. My dad had moved to Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. That's where I grew up. That's where I was born and raised. And my parents, being immigrants to this country, never really let go and never really sort of assimilated the idea that they were raising kids in America. So, for example, birthday parties. I wasn't allowed to go to friends' birthday parties. I wasn't allowed to go out and play till like 6 o'clock because my mom didn't want me to get dark. Or I wasn't allowed to go to dances, and I wasn't allowed to go to football games. And there was a lot of things that it was always no, 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 because they just wanted to keep me close and protect me from all the things that they didn't know. I really hated them for it. I really hated them for it because I was a creative kid and I really wanted to do other things. And at every turn, it was always no. And I remember one time I went and just signed up for cheerleading practice, you know, just on the sly, and was going to like sneak out the door, and they caught me and they wouldn't let me. And I just really hated them for it because you're just a kid. You just want to be like your friends. And there's more to it than that, but just, you know, at a basic level, when you're not allowed to do stuff, like go to a kid's birthday party, and then all of a sudden people stop inviting you just because they're like, well, she's not going to come anyway. Yeah, that's when you really wish you had different parents. That's when I wish I had different parents. I have a younger brother, he's 7 years younger, but that was enough of a gap that we really just were never close.
But her brother was treated much differently.
I wasn't allowed to, you know, date really, and yet he was out, you know, gallivanting around with girls. He could stay out late, he had his own car. He totaled a car, he got another car, and actually now he's in jail for the 3rd time. He's in federal prison for the 3rd time. And so talk about being able to do whatever you want. I was one end of the spectrum, and he got they were so lax with him that he is now in prison for the 3rd time.
She showed an interest in journalism at an early age.
I'd say like 11. And really I had to credit my mom with this because she would root through the paper and find essay contests or poetry contests and just force me to write for them. And I think that was where I sort of started to generate that love of words. A lot of people ask me, how'd you know you wanted to get into TV? And I just have these very distinct memories of a family ritual every day at 6 o'clock. We would all sit down in front of you know, the television and watch the evening news. It's something that we always did.
But her parents had other plans for her career.
My dad and I were out at a social function somewhere. We met friends, and you know, the general question that people ask, oh, you know, you're going to college, Joya, what would you like to do? And even before I answered, my dad was like, oh, she's going to be a doctor. She's going to be a gynecologist. And I just was like, wow, I don't think I really want to be either. You know, and I remember saying to them at one point, you know, Dad, I want to be a journalist. And he was like, no, if I'm paying for this, you're going to be a doctor. Well, see, I grew up in a household where women were always second class. Women didn't really have a say when it came to money. They didn't have a say when it came to making decisions. They didn't have a say much about anything. My mom was really just the person who provided the food and took care of the kids and really wasn't allowed to have an opinion. But I remember thinking at a very young age that something was seriously wrong here, and that the minute that I got a chance to get out, I was going to get out and I was never going to look back.
Having an abusive father affected Joya in many ways.
It affected the way I related to boys. I just remembered always being very scared of them, just being very scared, because that my only model for a guy was my dad, and being very violent and hitting my mom and throwing things and things like that. It was just screaming, yelling, and so I was very scared. I mean, that was my first real sort of, I remember, gut level reaction to boys.
School provided Joya a chance to escape.
I was definitely popular because I was a bit of a personality. I was definitely considered smart, you know, something that I did.
But applying for college was a different story altogether.
You know, most parents here, they go and they section out time and they say, okay, I'm going to go visit XYZ college. We're going to go and, have you get interviews and really sit down and like study the process and do it. My parents didn't do that. They were just like, okay, so we want you to go to either Harvard, Yale, or Brown. You apply to those schools and let's see what happens. And then they were just like, okay, so figure it out. And so I remember applying to Pitt and Penn State. I remember applying to Bucknell because my parents made me. And then I remember applying to like 9 Ivy League schools, which I got into none of them. I got into Pitt and I got into Penn State, and this is an important piece because I got scholarships to both because I was a very good student. But my parents looked at that and they said, well, we don't really want you to go to that school. We want you to go to Bucknell because it's a better school. And I really felt when they made that decision, it was about what they were going to say at their cocktail parties or at their friends' parties, that my kid goes to this school. And what really bugs me to this day, and I've been able to reconcile it, but I remember I went through my first year of school, and college was great because I was free, and I remember joining the rowing team and just going out and having fun and just being able to make all the decisions that I wanted to make on my own and, be out with boys or whatever it was.
But then she received some bad news.
And then I remember second semester, sophomore year, I went to register for my classes, and the registrar said, well, your parents didn't pay for last semester, and they didn't pay for this semester either. Get out. And I remember thinking, I am not going home. We're going to sit here and we're going to figure this out, but I'll tell you one thing, I am not going home. I was not going to go back to that house. And that was another layer of that was another sort of thing that came into the breach between my dad and I. He never told me that he never saved for school. That was pretty much when I was like, okay, well, you never have the right to tell me what to do ever again. We're done. You and I are done.
This fueled a fire within Gioia to do whatever she could to pay for college on her own, and it paid off.
So I remember going into the CFO's office of the university, and I remember it was the first time that man smiled at me. He's like, you are a very lucky girl. You just got a scholarship. And it was from some doctor who had set aside a scholarship for aspiring journalists. And it was because I'd written all these letters, and so that financed half of it. And they were like, okay, so what are you going to do about the rest of it? And I said, right now, my parents are out of the equation. This is between you and me. We're going to sit down, strike up a deal where the minute I graduate, I'm going to start paying you back. And so I struck a deal with the devil, and that's pretty much what I did. So I paid for all of college, and I'm still paying for it. And then I paid for grad school as well. Grad school was work, whereas college, I was free for the first time, so I missed a lot of class. It didn't really matter. But grad school was when I think by like junior year is when I got really serious in college. And then by grad school, it was work. It was, this is the time that I'm going to have to I have a year and a half to really just make this happen. And so I'm making the most of it. So I made sure not only was I going to class, but I was working at the alumni office, which is ultimately how I got the internship. Made sure I went to as many conferences and things that I could go to, interned, at the local station, just really putting myself in harm's way in every which way possible to make sure that I was going to make this happen.
And it did happen.
Well, I went to grad school because I didn't know anybody in the industry, and I figured the best way to try and build a base of contacts was to go to school and make the most of that experience. And as it turned out, I got an internship with the chief financial correspondent at Nightly News at the time, Mike Jensen. And then I went to work for CNBC as a producer. And so right away I started with business news, and I was streaming these morning Squawk Box interviews for the web so people could come back and visit them later. So that was job one. And then I went to CBS.com as it was getting off the ground, and that was more general assignment. Then I went to a small affiliate in Casper, Wyoming, population 50,000. Well, I got out there because it was someone that I knew from BU who was out there. It was a ragtag bunch of East Coast kids putting on the news every day. And his weekend anchor had just left for Minot, North Dakota, and he said, "Hey, I need a co-anchor. How do you feel about coming out to Casper, Wyoming?" I flew out there, checked it out, wondered if I could do it, and then, within a few weeks I was out there. The population of the town was very homogeneous, so I would say there were probably 2 Indians by the time I arrived there, and the other one was the doctor in town. So it was a very, very small minority population there, but I didn't feel that anybody was so much bothered by it. Everybody was pretty mellow.
But her time in Wyoming was just a launching pad for what was to come.
6 months. I already knew what I wanted to do. I wanted to come back to New York and do business news. So 6 months later, I was back, and I'd gotten the job at Bloomberg. And literally, I cold called the hiring producer because I knew that this job was open at the New York Stock Exchange. And I cold called her and gave her my pitch,
And she said, okay, so when are you going to be in New York? I made sure I was in New York as soon as possible, and I got the job, and I came back.
The job at Bloomberg taught her a lot.
I'd say I got my on-the-job MBA at Bloomberg. I got hired there as a producer first to shadow the reporters that were at the New York Stock Exchange doing reports every half hour.
Joya
So
would
just
then
by
compile
sheer
the information the reporters would deliver on air.
You know what? I worked with some really tough reporters. I think, honestly, my biggest memory is that I worked under some women that were really tough. And at the end of the day, I respected them because they were really good at what they did, but they were tough on me.
And again, hard work paid off.
And then eventually I got up to the point where I was delivering reports each day and giving a tape to my boss, and when she deemed me worthy or deemed me, capable of like having mastered the language. There's a language that goes with explaining business news and being able to just do off the cuff, because a lot of this is not prompted. The market's changing so fast. You've got to not only be able to analyze the markets, but you've got to be able to do it on the fly, whether you're on the floor, whether you're sitting in a chair. And that took a lot of time, but I'd say about like 7 or 8 months later, I was starting to do on the air work because I'd figured it out. After Bloomberg, I went to become a markets reporter for CNN. And what was really fun for me is that I used to do the market preview at 5 in the morning every day on CNN International, and my grandmother in Calcutta would be watching at, 5 o'clock her time, because we were 12 hours ahead. And we really built up a connection because of that. Once I got on CNN, my parents could see it, my grandparents could see it, and it was my comeuppance for all this time that I'd been toiling away on my own trying to make this career of mine happen. Yeah, so CNN FN eventually shut down. The entire business unit shut down, and so several people, in fact, a lot of folks were let go, producers, writers, segment producers, as well as anchors. So I then freelanced for CNN for a while. I freelanced for MTV, MTVnews.com, both writing and parlaying some of my web skills that I had from when I had first worked at CNBC and CBS.com. And I also hosted a series for the Discovery Channel called Moneymakers. And it was a 14-part episode set in Washington, D.C., where we followed 14 families over the course of a month. And at the outset, they had to establish they had a dream. Maybe they wanted to build a deck. Maybe they wanted to buy a car. Maybe they wanted to go on a vacation as a family together. But they just couldn't muster the money for it. And our plan was to go in and find that money inside the money that they were already making, within the budgets that they already had, and figure out where you could save, maybe by buying generic groceries, maybe by getting a different cell phone plan, but really charting that over the course of a month and seeing where they ended up after 4 weeks. And I, also hosted the show AVS along the side, and that really gave me sort of the teeth to figure out how to write things and make them exciting. And so after freelancing for about a year or so, I got the chance to fill in on WABC doing their morning business inserts. So there's the 5 a.m. to 7 a.m. morning drive. When they go through the cycle of news, traffic, business, weather, and so I was going to be the business portion of it, and ultimately that became a full-time job for me. I did that for 4 years, and so every morning I was up at 2:30, into the office by 3:30, on the air by 5. It was right here from this very spot. The hardest part of that job is getting up every morning at 2:30 and being on when that camera comes on, and it really just pushed me to my limits in what I can and can't do, how little sleep I can get by on, and be able to get up there no matter what's going on in my personal life, to be able to get up there and still be able to do the news each day, because that's just a really consuming schedule, because you're always, even when you leave work, it stays with you because you're always tired, or you're trying to get a nap in so you can get to an evening event. It taught me my outer limits when it came to energy.
But this busy schedule was about to take a massive toll on Joya.
It's just a real wake-up call that you've got to take care of yourself.
When we return on Journeys.
So then, times are tough, and so WABC, much like many other media companies, decided to really shrink their budgets, and business news was going to be something that was going to go. And I got very lucky in that I got picked up by a consultancy, a company called FTI Consulting, that's advising on all the big companies that are in crisis right now, where I am interviewing the majority of the thought leaders across the New York office and the London office and other offices around the world, and asking them about the companies that they're consulting on. What kind of work are they doing? What are they doing to help these companies restructure their debt? Or what are they doing to, help them with a merger or an acquisition, things like that.
But in 2008, Joya's hectic schedule caught up with her.
My mom was here for Mother's Day, and she looked at me, and I was wearing some dress, and she's like, she didn't want to tell me I looked pregnant, but she was like, "What's going on with your belly?" I was like, "Oh, I just started doing Pilates. My body must be changing." And she was like, "No, that just doesn't look right. So I remember going to the doctor. I went to the gynecologist that Tuesday, and the first thing he says to me is like, are you by any chance pregnant? And I said, no, I'm definitely not. And he's down there with a stethoscope feeling for a heartbeat, you know? And I'm like, I'm telling you, I'm not pregnant. And then he's like, well, you're not, you know, he sends me for a pregnancy test, comes back negative, and then he's like, well, you've got a huge mass down there. I don't know how you don't even know. I had a big 2.5-pound tumor that was growing off of my uterus, and until they took it out, they didn't know if it was cancer or not. Well, I was just working a really tough schedule, getting up every morning at 2:30, getting in by 3:30, getting by on 4 hours of sleep, and the doctor said, you know, if you're not sleeping, this is something that's hormonal. And this is the first time that I was really faced with the fact that my career and my lifestyle was probably really impacting what I was doing, and I needed to stop. Like, this was my wake-up call, that I needed to stop waking up at that hour of the morning because my body was just not going to take it anymore. So that began weeks and weeks of sonograms and MRIs and blood tests for cancer, and nothing was definitive. They just knew they could see this huge mass, and I remember looking at the sonogram and seeing it and thinking, God, that looks really scary.
Within a matter of days, Joya's vision of her future had changed dramatically.
You know, I remember the first thing when I get into the hospital, they were having me sign off on all these lines, and basically each line was like, we want you to understand that you might have to undergo a full hysterectomy, you may never have children, that we might have to maybe take away one ovary, in which case you could with another ovary. And up until that moment, all I thought was like, I was just waiting to meet the right guy. I never in a million years thought I was going to have to worry about not having the right equipment.
But her surgery was successful.
And I remember the first words out of my mom's mouth when I was coming out of anesthesia was, you kept all your organs, you don't have cancer. And I will say, to my mom's credit, she did come around and she did come help me, because I couldn't have done it without her for those 2 weeks.
And she had the support of good friends.
But it's just at that moment when all these people came every day with food, and then my friend Jane made up a schedule so that she made sure somebody was there every single day. I was just really overwhelmed at how much of an impact I've had on other people's lives if they came to my side that way.
After a trip to India, Joya was able to find strength in a new relationship with her grandmother.
We'd already been having great conversations on the phone, and she's a very different person than my mom, because we could talk about art, we'd talk about politics, we'd talk about, you know, the restaurant I went to and the kind of fish I had. Like, we could have some really great conversation about things beyond just, you know, what are you doing bad today? One of the conversations that Grandma and I will often have is that maybe I got my strength from her. You know, maybe it just skipped a generation. But, you know, I look at my mom now, and for the amount of abuse that she has sort of survived, she's strong in her own way.
The reconnection with her grandmother also began an internal reconnection to her roots.
Definitely. I feel like I underwent a renaissance where being Indian became more important to me. I embraced it for the first time. But I think as a kid, when you're growing up, you know, you're like, oh, Mom, you know, it's not cool. You know, it's just not cool to, like, you know, wear the clothes or to eat the food. And so you spend a fair amount of time distancing yourself from it. And then once I actually felt like I had my own identity and I had enough space from it, it was nice to re-embrace it on my own terms.
And another of Joya's endeavors also helped her re-embrace her identity.
I started hosting AVS. You know, and that helped me sort of reach out to an Indian community that some people only know me from. And that's another thing, like now I'm talking about movies that my cousins are watching, and so we now have that interface, we have that dialogue that's in real time, not something that happened like 6 months ago. You know, we can talk about the actors and who's doing what and who's dating what. I remember when I interviewed Amitabh Bachchan, who is one of the premier, if not the premier, Indian male actor. That was really kind of being at the top of the pile for me.
So how does she prepare for AVS?
Well, with that, the producer will send me an outline, essentially, of the points that he wants to hit and the order in which he wants to hit them. And then the majority of my research is either press releases or I'm searching on the web. I mean, there are multiple articles from varieties of sources that are written up, or reviews that are written up about actors and movies. And there's always a Wikipedia entry on a movie that's about to release that gives you the basic essentials, because that's where the bulk of a lot of my research comes from. And so I rewrite the entire script so it sounds like me. And I really enjoy that process more than anything. I love that I get to write it, but the bonus is I get to deliver it. I think the toughest thing for me, and probably my AVS producer Raju Sethi would tell you, it's the pronunciations. The pronunciations of the names and some of the actors were probably the toughest thing for me. And one way that I overcame that is, of course, by doing it each week. But the other is by listening to Hindi songs. Just having that constantly like fed into my ear when I'm working out or if I'm on the train is a good way to kind of get that lilt in pronouncing things.
So what's her goal now?
I would really love to have my own 5 a.m. to 7 a.m. morning broadcast, Wake Up with Joya. I would love to do a news show like that. That's always been something I've wanted to do. I would love to stay in business news for sure. Yeah, I would love to have my own wine bar.
And on the personal side?
Yeah, I would love to get married. I would love to have kids. You know, I went through a phase of thinking that I wanted to only be with an Indian, and now it's just kind of finding the right person.
When is she most happy?
Oh man, I'm most happy when I'm in a room. I love organizing events, and I'm most happy when I've stressed about it and I've, you know, done all the logistics and the planning for it, and, you know, all the people have showed up and then the room is just swelling and I just see everybody talking to each other and having a great time, and that's when I'm most happy, because it's just all gelled, it's all worked. I'm most happy probably when I'm on a beach. I'm probably most happy when I'm on a beach with a loved one. And I'm most happy when I'm in Italy drinking great wine.
Her advice to others?
Don't take no for an answer. Don't ever take no for an answer. And if someone says no, figure out a different way to make it happen. I think that and that was something at CNN I really wanted to anchor, and you know, they weren't receptive to it. So I said, I thought about it. I was like, okay, so what do I have in my asset base that I can capitalize on? Oh, I'm Indian. And that was when I remember calling Raju at AVS and saying, you know, could I maybe anchor your show? So I achieved anchor, but not in the traditional way, because I wasn't going to take no for an answer. I think that you have to, well, the first thing you got to do is figure out what you want, because you're just otherwise going willy-nilly. You got to know what exactly you want. And then you just start putting yourself in harm's way. I'm a huge believer in that, whether it's in dating, whether it's in professional, whether it's in anything. If something you want, you've got to immerse yourself in some situation that's going to put you in harm's way.
And the name of the game in this business? Persistence.
Yeah. I just remember being a lot of no's, like no, 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 no. But that's the industry. I mean, you've got to be able to take a lot of rejection and a lot of no's. And I think each no propelled me further. I remember having a great mentor. He was a Trinidadian guy who I'm still great friends with, JB, who used to be the camera operator behind the scenes. And, you know, I told you when I was hired at Bloomberg, they were really not, even though I was hired to eventually be on air, that manager then left. And so the new manager was like, well, I really don't know what your future is going to be like being on air. And
That's pretty blunt.
Yeah, and I remember that this guy was like, Joy, are you going to make a tape today? Are you going to make a tape today? Are you going to get up and do a report today? And I'd really thrown in the towel. I was like, it's just not going to happen for me. And he really pushed me. And he saw a kinship in me, or saw something in me that he wanted to keep pushing me. And I'm glad that he did, because eventually doing all those tapes did eventually lead to me being on air. Someone saw it.
And surround yourself with the right people.
I have invaluable friends. I have such great friends that I can rely on, and I've had some great men who've been boyfriends in my life who've been huge support systems for me. Honest to goodness, if I couldn't have made it without some of them.
One thing's for sure, Joya represents the changing face of TV.
Yeah, I think that it's great, especially, you know, with the more Indian faces that are now on TV. And as I said, as I got on CNN, a lot of people were like, that's so great, because you're representative of a sea change when it comes to Indian kids, because they're all doctors, lawyers, and engineers. It's so great that you broke out and you did this. I had come into CNN at a time when I remember, you know, the overwhelming look they were going for at the time was blonde hair and blue eyes. And I think that was the first time that I really felt like, wow, I'm Indian, and that means something. I think that it's cool to be Indian now. You know, that's something that's really, I just saw the first sports anchor on ESPN who was an Indian. And I was like, that's so great, you know? But when someone comes up and recognizes me or says I'm a real inspiration because I am Indian and I've done this, that's my comeuppance, that's my validation for all the hard work and sacrifice that I've made.
And she has some advice for parents, too.
Asked me, I mean, I just spoke at a Merrill Lynch event, I remember last year, and there were a lot of parents who came up to me and said, you know, my daughter, she really wants to be a journalist, and I just don't want to expose her to all the ugly side of the industry. What would you recommend? And I was like, well, I think it's so important to talk to your kid, because that's not something that I ever had. And I think it's so important to sit and talk to your kid and find out what they want and encourage them, you know, and go with them and see what it's about so you're not afraid of it.
Her definition of success?
I think when you love what you do and you come home every day with that feeling, that's success. And it doesn't necessarily have to be on TV. It doesn't necessarily have to be the best job ever. It's just that you did your best and you walk home with that feeling in your stomach. And that's what makes me happy at the end of the day.
I'm so lucky that I do something that I love, and that is the reward that I carry away each day. The bonus or the icing on the cake is when someone says, hey, you know, you really inspired me, or hey, you know, I really enjoy watching you.